ever since you guys invited me to be on this, I've been listening. I've figured out that I actually
This is how
sleep
I was
so
going to
much
start the
better.
show. I was going to
Yeah.
be like,
No, really.
I heard that we're all sleeping together now.
Yeah. No, I figured out that I sleep better at night, like listening to podcasts. So yeah, I jumped ahead. Sorry, I ruined it. So I don't know if it's romantic or awkward or wonderful or it's maybe all those
Maybe
things.
architecture
I
needs
have
more
no
of
idea.
this. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Are you saying
Yeah.
romance
Yeah.
or
I'm leaving it open to interpretation.
No. Yeah. No. Yeah. No. It
it
is
would be a
funny
lot
that.
better if we were just sleeping together.
Yeah.
Everybody,
No.
all of it,
Yeah.
all of it. The
Yeah.
architects, yes.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
I think that's actually what a lot of architecture people do. Actually. So,
Well, we do
in
need to lighten
fairness.
up. That may
I've heard
help.
the
That may
stories.
help. Like if we just lightened up
Yeah.
as an industry, right?
Yeah. 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 No.
You know,
Totally. Yeah.
it was interesting. I had a conversation with, we have a couple of externs in our office this week, and they're just kind of like shadowing, looking at like what they're getting into and stuff like that. And one of them happened to be a military veteran, and they were like, "Oh, I want to make sure that you talk to Cormac. He can kind of talk you through like his experiences in anything." And I was telling her that you're gonna sit there and you're gonna watch everybody scurry around, running into each other, acting all crazy and stuff, and you're just gonna sit back and say, "Dude, it's not that hard. It's not that crazy. Like, you're stressing over nothing."
Yeah.
And she's just like, "Oh my God, I know." She's like, "I don't understand that these people think that this is pressure."
Yeah. I know. Yeah. I
And
know.
I was just
Yeah.
like, I was like, "I know."
It's funny. I was telling Evan last time, and I actually heard one of your episodes where you were talking about being an ACE mentor. So I did that for years. I think 10 plus years. I was telling Evan I was an anti-architecture mentor. I tried to convince everybody from going into architecture. I'm like, it's the life of heartache and misery.
I
Don't
was
do
going to
it.
bring this up as
Be an
well
engineer.
because of this to me sounds like an
Well, then I should
amazing
just shut up.
icebreaker here. Like,
Well, then I just give
explain
up.
what you mean by an anti-architecture
Yeah.
mentor.
No, so it's
Oh,
funny. So yeah, there's a long story, but I will spare you the details. But know that when I graduated, it was the highest unemployment rate in America, and the first and only job I could find was as a janitor at NC State Libraries, making $9 an hour. So 3 years later, I became a principal at a major firm. But like, there's a weird story in between, as one does, obviously. But I went into manufacturing in between that, and I got involved in ACE Mentors program, and it was the architecture mentor to a lot of students. All of which who have this very kind of glamorized kind of Hollywood kind of view of what architecture actually is. I mean, hell, half the architects I know can't actually figure out how to describe what it is that they actually do. So I was just trying to be very honest and real with that were looking at going into the profession. One of which, who I still work with every day almost. I've known her since she was 14. She's amazing. Like, she's like 28 years old and is a rock star designer. And I got her a job at Sanders Space Architects in Knoxville, Tennessee, but she still works with me on some public art stuff. But there was another kid one time. He was just I was like doing reviews in NC State, and this guy comes up to me. He was like, "Hey, man, I've met you before." And I was like, "Really?" And he was like, yeah, you gave a talk about architecture and you tried to tell us not to go into architecture. And I thought you were the biggest jerk. And now I like look back on it and I'm like, that dude, he was trying to help me out, man. Like, I should have listened to that guy. And that guy still reaches out to me and I occasionally talk to him. And he's, I think, trying to figure out how to navigate his change of career path.
Well, let me go. So part of this conversation that I was having with this girl who's, I think, a junior in college right now, and she's 15-year Navy veteran. And
Jesus.
And so, I was talking to her and I was just like, because we started talking about podcasting. She's like, "Oh my God, why do you do podcasting?" And it was just, I kind of try to explain it to her the same way that the way I wish the Army was at the time. It was sort of like the way of why we do the podcast, but it's also one of the ways that one of the reasons why I do Ace is I came from the other side of the tracks in a lot of the people that I work with in Ace, they've never even heard of a career in architecture, never considered a career in architecture, design, or construction.
Yep.
They have never been exposed to this. And so what I try to do is bring my experience of coming from a non-conventional background. My father was a line worker at General Motors, and that would have been my fate, or whatever would have been my fate. But,
Sure.
I pursued the circuitous route of going into architecture. And like the reason why we do this is a lot of times it's because we're sitting there talking about like why it is that we do what we do and why we go through the whole insanity of of the profession, and try to be as real about it as possible. And I was talking to her,
Totally.
I was like, I wish that if my recruiters told me the truth about the Army, would I have gone in the Army? Probably. But if the, academic counselors would have told me, what architecture, it's funny you said this
right?
Well, I mean,
Yeah,
the funny thing is,
that's the
even if we asked architects, could they tell us what we do?
Yeah, no, totally.
And so, I mean, that's kind of like the whole point of this is just talking about the reality of what it is that we do and why it is we still do it, and why it is we actually talk it for the past 12 years, why we've actually talked about what it is that we do.
No, totally, man. Yeah, no, it's no, I could not agree with you more. So yeah, it's interesting. It's funny. I meet people all the time. They're like, "Oh, I always wanted to be an architect. Sometimes I was bad at math, or I couldn't draw." And I was like, "Man, dude, I went into architecture because I was bad at math. I couldn't draw. I was terrible at science. Couldn't spell. Like it was either that or become a bank robber. It was like one of those two things.
Those are the options.
Like those are the only two options. Yeah.
I was just in DC yesterday, went to a conference, and we'll talk about that in our next episode of it, that conference. But I was in an Uber getting a ride into the office before I headed out to the conference. And, she was just like, "Well, what brings you into town?" And it's like, "I'm just here for a conference." "Oh, what kind of conference?" And like, "Something about architecture." She's like, "I wanted to be an architect, but, I went into real estate instead." And also an Uber driver. And I was just like, "That's cool." She's like, "Yeah, I just couldn't handle the math." And I'm like, you don't know how many times I've heard that story about I was like, in my almost immediate response is exactly like yours. It's just, I went into architecture because I was bad at math, because I didn't know math.
Yeah,
I was like,
exactly.
I was a creative thinker, I was a critical thinker, problem solver. And that's more of like our core competency than actually adding.
Totally. Yeah, no, totally.
I mean, this is my best
I was just going to say,
right
like,
here.
you just mentioned addition, and that's what you're bad at is addition, Cormac? Like, like you're good at trig and calculus, but addition, that's the hard part.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Is that how this is going to go?
That's how this is going to go.
I know where you live. I know where you live.
I don't think you do.
Yeah.
You kind of do. All right.
I do,
All right.
actually.
Yeah,
I
that's
have
right.
pinned.
Yeah, I know. You stalk me. Okay, so we have not formally introduced our guest. There's a third voice on this podcast.
Oh,
For the
sorry.
astute listeners out
sorry.
there who can't tell the difference between Cormac and I already, there's a third person on this call. People watching this already know this. But William Dodge, welcome to the podcast. Architect, artist,
Thanks for having
author, all kinds of things. You sound like you're a Renaissance man. The reason you're on the show, and I'm just gonna read a quote. I'm not even gonna. I'm gonna have you describe what you've done here. Technology will change the way we practice. If we're lucky, the industry will reimagine itself entirely. That's the quote I wanted to lead off with, because I think that's kind of like the tag of this article that you've written. I want you to introduce it, but welcome to the show. It's great to have you here.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me. And for clarification, I should very briefly clarify the fact that I never actually got my license. I used to run major practices. So I used to run major practices, but I believe that the world is a safer place without me having
you're
the
going to
ability
take
to be able
the
to
SAT.
stamp a
You
drawing.
might as well just make it the ARE. I think.
Yeah. No, it's funny actually. And speaking of people, the architects, my girlfriend, her father had one rule growing up. He was a senior architect at Albert Kahn. You will not be an architect. You will not date or get involved with an architect. And so when I quit my job, I was the managing principal of a firm called Hanbury. And when I left, in the North Carolina office in particular. So when I left, Amelia told her dad, she was like, well, congratulations, Dad. All your greatest fears have come true. I'm now dating an unemployed architect. I was
Not
like,
an architect.
correction, unemployed pretend architect. Pretend architect. That is what
Yeah.
but it's, no, I used to run a major practice of about 45 people. So it's obviously, I know quite a lot about the industry, but never bothered to get my license for a variety of reasons. Not the least of which is actually the fact that I believe that architecture in general has become such a commodity in the United States that I'd actually rather have the title of designer than architect anyway. And yeah, I mean, the whole industry, to kind of go back to your question, I mean, the whole industry is kind of built on kind of, exploiting the resources of young designers, working them indiscriminately, and billing them out significantly higher to basically pay the salaries of principals, et cetera. And that's how it's always worked. And it's never evolved. It's a profoundly broken profession. I think anyone that you talk to that actually works within a profession would agree with that. Now, what does that actually mean, and what are the paths to move forward is the question. Point in the article that you referenced is, I believe, so kind of through a weird series of events. I mean, going back to Cormac, what you said earlier about where you grew up. I grew up 50 feet from a tobacco field in eastern North Carolina, man. So I totally get it. I mean, my father was like a university librarian, and my mom was an English teacher. So I mean, there was like, it's not like I was, going to go work in a factory or anything like your experience, but I wasn't necessarily surrounded by architecture. Well, I mean, I was. It was just the tobacco barns that I grew up with. And so, yeah, it's like for me, kind of going into architecture, I believe that I could really open people's eyes to new possibilities, and kind of thought about architecture as being this kind of really great architecture helps to tell a story and to help maybe it's naive, but could better humanity in some way. Certainly that's not maybe 100% is an incredibly idealized version of the profession, but it's certainly not the way that we found ourselves. As we've kind of grown over the decades as a profession, we've really started to commoditize ourselves in a really significant way, in particular in this country. I practice a lot globally, and it's funny, all architects, you can always tell an architect. It doesn't matter if you don't speak their language or whatever country you're in, you could always 100% pinpoint an architect. But when you talk to folks practicing outside of the U.S., it is pretty interesting to see kind of what a radical difference the practice is. And I'm hopeful that with AI, you'll start to see a rise of micro studios, because right now, the thing that is with the Genslers and the Perkins and Wills, and I'm just using them as examples because they're enormous. They win a lot of their projects just simply through iteration, production, portfolio. Okay, well, through a weird series of events, I found myself on the Fast Company's Impact Council, which is kind of like their board of executive CEOs and stuff from all over the world, which is hilarious that I'm on there. We won an urban design award for a public art project, it's the world's only totally dynamic climate change memorial. So they were like, hey, you're doing some $50,000 total project budget, 57 cents a square foot, by the way. So they were like, you're doing some pretty interesting stuff. You want to be on our impact council. But it's interesting because kind of sitting in those conversations with many of the world's experts on AI and technology, and hearing about what's going on that will not be public knowledge for 10 or 15 years. It's just extraordinarily obvious that we're going to not necessarily be, we're going to shift our role as architects from being producers of documents to becoming more creative directors, much as the same way that senior architects and principals do now. We're just basically going to be cutting out a lot of the staff. So there's pluses and minuses to that, right? What you do is you democratize design, and you really give the opportunities to be able to go and kind of create best ideal win scenarios, But what you're also doing is you're kind of making it really challenging for people that are in the process of trying to break into the profession, right? Because then all of a sudden like the three of us and some stranger on the street can go and compete with Gensler to build a billion square foot building or whatever, just because we've got constant ability to be able to iterate and we've got the knowledge to be able to creatively direct that. Well, Susie or Bob that's coming out of school doesn't necessarily have that. They do have the expertise they do have the expertise in being naive. And I should very specifically call that an expertise, because a lot of times we tend to think that expertise is so wonderful. Man, it's not. I mean, it is a lot of times, because you know what you're doing. The bad part is you know what you're doing. So you're too predisposed to what is and isn't a good idea. So you can't really think about things in new ways anymore. So, there is a serious advantage to not having 20 years of experience, but in this scenario, it's not necessarily the best situation.
I think this plays back into your comment earlier too about using young staff to pay principal salaries. It's also not that really plays out this way, but this is what happens in school, right? It's like that's where the great ideas are. This is why a lot of people who practice also are working at a school teaching studios, is because it's a great place to hear ideas and participate in that process.
Yeah.
But even to your point, it's, so I just started teaching a semester ago, and the reinvigoration that I've experienced.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Is amazing, because now I'm with a bunch of naive, don't know squat about architecture, but that's the fun part of it. It's like,
that's the awesome part.
It's that, sense of discovery, that sense of like exploration, that when you are 25 years into your career and you're sort of like become the curmudgeon, and you're just like, well, I've been doing this for 25 years, just like you've heard on the job sites and stuff like that, when it's just like, this is just the way that we do it kind of thing, isn't always the best idea. That's not where creativity lives, in the this is the way we used to do it, and this is the way we're going to do it.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, if I told somebody 15 years ago, well, let's say 20 years ago now, that I was going to carry one of the world's most powerful computers in the palm of my hand, it was going to be a phone made out of glass and have 3 buttons on it, they would have told me I was crazy.
Absolutely.
But, the trick is that the world's greatest innovators are inherently the people that don't know any better, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's Steve Jobs, one of his famous quotes, like, or maybe it might not even be Steve Jobs, but it's like, we don't build these things based on what our customers tell us they want, right? It's like Henry Ford also, right? People said I wanted a faster horse, right? Not a car. And it's like people don't know what they what they want, and I think that's an accurate statement. I'm curious, from your point of view, you talked earlier about this idea of curation, right? Like orchestration, like the idea that basically what you said, it like principals do it now. You reference this in your article,
creative direction,
and it's like you're marking things up, and then the minions and the computers and the robots and the interns and the younger, like whatever you want to call it, like they're doing the actual work, but this idea of curation and really going that direction. I'm just wondering if you could expand on that a little bit, because I want to make sure that this lands, because I also think it's true. It's like technology is happening at an astounding rate, and also I don't think architects should be competing on the quality of their drawings, because architects, I don't think, should be competing in that space at all when it comes to, like, Cormac works with large scale contractors on projects who are redrawing everything anyways, because they're drawing it how they need it, right? The drawings that we produce are for construction, but they're also for for permits, right? They're for different.
They're
things.
more for design intent. Yeah. They're more like, here's the idea. Now, if you could figure out a better way to do it, we won't get sued, that'd be awesome.
But see, I kind of wish that was true. And so, Evan and I have talked about this in the past, where, and even in your article, you're talking about kind of like setting up the stage for technology to basically take the mundane tasks and things like that out of it, so that we can go back to basically what it was that we came to this profession to do in the first place.
Where the value is.
You're talking about exactly where our value is. And a lot of times, and I'll give you an example, is, here we are, Evan alluded to me working on really large projects with large contractors and stuff. And they are exactly doing that. They are taking, we had a conversation last week when I was kind of like loading up all my drawings and big project. 2,156 was what I had told him was the amount of drawings that were done. So think about like the obscene amount of production that went into that. But actually, I finished uploading all of the drawings and it ended up being 2,586.
So
this is why I never got my license.
This is not, and as he said on, and as he said on the last episode, that is nothing to be proud of. And I totally agree, because ultimately at the end of the day, once they start producing shop drawings and things like that, all of those drawings are kind of pointless. They've become just some,
Well, you build a model, to get drawings, and then those drawings go to build another model to make more drawings, right? Like it's just like, what the hell is going on here?
It's this weird cyclical event. And so you sort of ask, what's the point? Why go through these? And, getting back to this kind of like this notion of us being more of like the creative director sounds far more appealing to most everybody when they don't really know what architects are all about anyway, and sometimes neither do we. And really, we got into this because we wanted to create. We wanted to have impacts,
or we were duped. One of those things.
Or we were duped because we thought we didn't do enough research. We didn't I was telling somebody that. I went into fine arts, I went into the Army, I went into architecture, and even dabbled in archaeology. All of those start with AR.
Oh my God, we have so much in common. That's wild. I did all those things.
All of those started with AR.
You
so
didn't
apparently
make it past
I
that
couldn't
part.
I couldn't get past the A's in the career handbook.
None of us did. Artist, architect,
Army. That's hilarious, man. No, that's interesting. Yeah, I used to study art. I studied archaeology and architecture in Malta, and I actually do work in Malta now. And one of my, just kind of going back to my original point or earlier point, my Maltese architect friends, what they'll do is basically do design intent drawings. And they'll design very specifically the key details that matter, but the GC is doing the rest of the drawings. Like they're like kind of more like the master kind of creative director. That's what the architect. And so they're a firm of currently four people now, and they're one of the best design firms in Europe. And they won the World Architecture Festival for best interiors. They've been a finalist for multiple categories of World Architecture Festival. They won the Architecture Review Awards. I mean, they're like just a top-notch design firm, but it could not possibly be more different than the kind of work that we do. I actually took two young designers, decided to come with me to Malta because they heard me talking about it so much. It's the one, it was my mentee is basically my kid, and her best friend, who was the last person I hired, who I never actually worked with, which is funny. She came with me and my girlfriend and some other people, and I took them to the office, and they were like, oh my God, I can't even imagine working like this. It's just so radically different than what we do. It is interesting because in that kind of cultural zeitgeist, we imagine that architects are like these super creative, like highly like tinkering all the time, becoming almost like inventors. And people think about Bucky Fuller, obviously not an architect, right? But did a lot for architecture, So, but people think about folks like that, which is just sadly that's not the case. I think of that there was that famous meme or the Instagram post or whatever it was that was going around, like I want AI to do my dishes and clean my house, and so I can do my art. I don't want it to do my art for me, so I can do those other things. And I think that's kind of what we're talking about. I mean, when I talk to people, I have a friend who's one of the world's experts in AI, and he was telling me they have whole synthetic teammates that work all night, and they come and they're like, hey, Will, how's it going? I've been working on this all night. What do you think? And then it's like full on conversations, and they grow with you in levels of experience. Right. And then when you retire, you basically that person because some becomes somebody else's mentor, right?
Yeah.
They also have fully synthetic user groups of like 40 people, basically, where you have like, okay, well, this is Mitch. He's Black American who grew up in Lansing, Michigan. He's got a PhD in philosophy. He's going through a divorce. He's a little feeling a little under the
Persona
weather
kind of stuff.
And this is Susie. She's a lawyer. Yeah, totally. And they give them whole personalities, and then they basically give them pitches and get the reaction. What jokes land, what don't, what designs land, what doesn't. And it's like that's kind of what we're talking about. And then when you start to kind of get into regenerative AI, I mean, or generative AI, it's a whole different scenario. But I guess what we're talking about, like a lot of people are thinking like ChatGPT and things. I mean, that's not what we're talking about. I think what it does, it's both terrifying and exciting at the exact same time. It's both dreams and nightmares are the same thing, it's just the other side of it, the different nightmares and dreams too, So I think it can be, AI can be a really wonderful thing for our industry, but it can also be a terrible thing. It just really depends on who's using it and how they're using it, and what they're using it for. So I think I personally welcome it. I mean, I think it's going to be interesting to see how it all shakes out.
So let me ask you, just as more of a novice in this, I'm the roll the sleeves up, kind of get into the projects and the weeds and all of this other stuff. And I am not a naysayer on the coming tide of AI. I know it's coming.
Sure.
As Evan says, the genie's out of the bottle. You can't put him back in. It's coming.
Yeah, totally.
So where do you see the benefit of AI in architecture? Not just kind of like big picture stuff, but also like where it is going to kind of improve the lives of, let's just say, the minions that are in the trenches, that are kind of grinding it out every day and really kind of like losing touch with the reality of what they actually wanted to get into architecture.
I'm raising my hand to preempt your answer, William, because I want to add to it. And that is like the thing that Cormac just said. Cormac finds value in that, right? Rolling up the sleeves.
Yeah.
Project managers they perceive value, I'm going to say, because I don't know if they find value in this, in sending a lot of email and checking things off in an Excel spreadsheet. And like that busyness, quote unquote busyness, is like that's what they go to work for. That's what they get paid for. They're not taking a lot of risk, although I'm sure that's you could probably debate that, right? But
you can debate it. If you say the wrong thing in an OAC meeting, you're getting sued.
But there's a lot of people who are quote unquote busy doing stuff, and you're not talking about that stuff. You're talking about getting rid of that stuff so that we can do more valuable things. Not everybody's cut out for that. Right. I'm just going to posit that. And I'm also going to posit that not everybody is able to do the mindset shift, the behavior shift, to become the orchestrator, to become the curator, to become the tastemaker, to do all those things, because they're super comfortable doing the busy work. And like that, to me, like that's just a different type of person. And I'm not saying like one's good or bad. Like I kind of am, but I'm kind of not, right? It's like there's, because what you're saying is like this wave's coming. I agree with that. And there's not room for everybody who's currently signed up to be in this profession, because the machine's going to do a lot of it, right? And so, I mean, there's architecture schools pumping out graduates all the time. And I would say there's been too many people in this profession for too long, like honestly, because we have this issue of paying these low-wage staff people to do high-dollar work. And there's that line just keeps going out the door. As soon as somebody gets fed up and leaves, there's somebody to take their place.
Yeah. Which back in previous generations, those people who were doing, I hate to call it the grunt work, but it's the grunt work of the detailing and the drawings and pumping out the construction documents. They were draftsmen. They weren't architects. Architects were doing things. Draftsmen were basically interpreting their things. Do you think that, and I've been listening to a lot of biographies on architects over the past couple of weeks, months. And
I've been listening to some of your thoughts on them.
And do you think that Corb or Frank Lloyd Wright or Gropius really did construction documents the way that architects? No, not at all.
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely not.
I
And
mean,
but actually,
they could have used maybe a little bit of technical knowledge to maybe
well,
keep
yeah,
water
that
out, but
actually, yeah, yeah, that
anyway,
actually
yeah,
brings me to a point. I write down a bunch of notes, so I'll try and remember. Don't let me get off the topic, but I
That's
do
all
want
we
to
do
point out.
here. Yeah.
You were talking about
Yeah.
basically. You were talking about in an episode recently about Mies not being able to keep water out, and yes,
Mhm.
same thing with Frank Lloyd Wright, coming in on the wood cell and stuff.
Yeah,
Have you seen Thomas Pfeiffer's new building where they built and they
yeah.
rebuilt or they built one of Mises' unbuilt projects? And I was just curious because you had the kind of the mindset of those buildings couldn't be built now, but they did build one
Mhm.
now.
Yeah.
And if you've seen it, what was your impression of it? I'm just
So,
curious.
I've only seen it in article, but I have, I am kind of partial to another Thomas Pfeiffer project. Unfortunately, it's closed right now for repairs because it's leaking.
The Glenstone.
Gladstone, yeah,
Yeah,
which is one of my
yeah,
favorite places. I
yeah.
love that place. Just the feeling that you get there is amazing. It's the way that it like. I don't know if there's art there. I'm pretty sure there is, but
It's not why you go.
I'm enamored with the building. It's not why
So,
I go.
so the jury's still out. Is
Yeah.
what you're saying is you don't know if modern construction
I
techniques, draft,
Yeah.
modeling, all these things will be able to keep the
well,
water out.
what's interesting is now I'm working on a smaller project, like one of the smallest projects I've worked on in a long time, that is basically repairing modernist details a on a building that basically failed. And when you look at them, you're like, of course it failed. There no wonder it failed is because if you look at it and you look at like here's the path of the water and the water is going
Sure.
into a stone coping and that stone coping basically is a sponge. And if you're not going to stop it from continuing down, it's going to leak. It's going to
Yeah.
deteriorate the panels. It's going to fall apart and it's all of these other things. So and
This
we're
kind of
gonna get
answered
we're
your
gonna
own question, right?
yeah.
You kind of answered your own question. Do
Well,
architects
so
necessarily need to do that?
yeah,
Or-
there's so many. So as I was reading the article, I read the article. I'm like, this is interesting. I'm curious what other people think, and so I sent it to a handful of friends to just kind of get their take on it, and it
Sure.
sparked a shitstorm of really, really interesting conversations. Not bad.
Yeah,
I
I
mean, they
bet.
weren't like,
Yeah,
oh my
yeah,
God,
no,
what is
that-
this idiot talking about?
Yeah,
Although
no,
I
that's
will
fine.
say,
I hear that all the time. Yeah.
I did not know this, but I sent it to a mutual friend of mine, Evan's, and yours.
Oh.
Who I'm not going to tell you who
Who-
it is. I'll tell you later when
Oh.
we're off. But
Yeah. No, I was gonna say that's I've
actually,
never
you know
known
what?
Bill in my life.
He probably wouldn't care.
Yeah.
Should I do it, Evan? Should I
don't
out
care.
him? Rusty Long.
Oh well, Rusty Long. So I actually didn't go to school with Rusty. I
Or
knew.
he
I
said he
know
crossed
Rusty.
Sorry, he said he crossed
Yeah.
paths with you at
Yeah.
State.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true.
Yes.
Yeah, I was trying to help him get a job. Yeah, yeah. No, I don't know him well. No, he's
Yeah.
no, he's great, and he
But
really
but apparently
knows. He
he's
does
heard
know
you.
what he talks about.
He's heard you enough to know
Yeah.
that oh yeah, this sounds like
Yeah.
the kind of thing. But
Yeah,
but
yeah,
it was,
yeah.
But it's really interesting because you have all of these different impressions about, and that's kind of like the impetus of the question that I asked you was because you have so many different people who have so many different impressions about what AI means in architecture.
Sure.
Some people were talking about it and they were welcoming it because it's just like, this is going to help me be more productive in what I really want to do. And then others are
Sure.
just like, is this going to take over like the thinking for people?
Or the creative part.
Are we going to lose that? Exactly. Are we going to lose the creative part? Is it just going to be image making now? Is it going to be where we lose that critical thinking, that problem solving
Yeah.
and stuff? And so there was a variety of different attitudes on it. And so me asking you,
It can be. It can be.
Exactly.
It just really depends on how you want to use it. It's the question,
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you wanted to do the creative stuff for you, it can do the creative stuff for you. I know firms that are allowing that to happen, and I'm seeing the quality of terrible designs that's coming out as a result. And
Yeah,
it's like, why would you want to give up that stuff? I mean,
right.
I don't know. I mean, to me, I see the value in iteration. I see the value in democratizing design. I
Mhm.
see the value in just kind of the details. How do you develop a perfect detail that's not going to leak and whatever? These are the materials. This is the angle. Whatever.
Right.
And I think when you start talking about that, I think that's really the best, most valuable thing for people that are creative and want to use it. However, I do think that people can use it for design. It's not going to be a good design tool. But that said,
Yeah.
I made the comment in this meeting last summer. I was in this again in this room with like all these global CEOs. It's hilarious. At the top of the New York Stock Exchange. It's the fanciest room I've ever been in my entire life. It's the executive board room in the New York Stock Exchange, and basically made any room in Versailles look silly by comparison. So it's
Yeah.
the room where like John Rockefeller and J.P. Morgan and Carnegie got together and figured out how they were going to take over the world. So I'm sitting there with many of the world's most kind of interesting people, and they were talking about the constant quest for perfection with AI, et cetera. And I brought up the point that currently, at least now, AI is one of its biggest benefits is the fact that it makes mistakes all the time. Because then, again, kind of going back to this whole leveraging, kind of the whole being naive, if I'm looking at 100 things, one of them might spark an idea.
Mhm.
And that is a tremendously valuable thing. Like, and I think that we get hung up on perfection a lot of times, and just good enough is sometimes really great. And I think that's the problem with architects in general. But then I have some of the world's best designers that I know personally that are using AI more for iteration and creatively directing things rather than saying, "Hey, Susie, Billy, stay up all night for the next 3 days and don't see your family to do these things." I see the value in that.
Can you explain
Personally,
what you mean by these micro studio idea, or maybe give a couple of, just give us an idea of what you're talking about? Because I think again, like that's open to wide interpretation. Like, what is a micro studio? But you talked about this group of four in
Yeah,
Malta, right? That are leveraging
yeah, yeah, yeah.
technology in what ways, and also kind of like the decisions that they've made to be the practice that they want to be. Like that means the things that they want to do,
Yeah.
but it also means the things that they don't do, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, and I should mention too, in particular, my firm in Malta that I'm referring to. They're wonderful. It's at Valentino Architects. They're amazing. Everybody should look them up. They're doing incredible work. So they're not necessarily using a ton of AI. We've talked about it. I mean, they use it occasionally, but they're more, again, just the method of practice is wildly
Okay.
different than it is in the United
So if
States.
you were gonna
So
explain what a micro
there's that.
practice is with this super
Yeah, I mean,
augmented,
actually, well, they would be a good example of kind of what could be now possible in the United States that isn't currently
nice,
possible.
yeah,
Right. You have three or four people that are able to leverage different expertise and kind of critical thinking to help drive constant iteration in order to achieve design success and project success. Right. As opposed to like needing a studio of 30, 40 people or thousands of people or whatever. I remember sitting in this meeting for Fast Company, and there was a CEO of this firm called Gray. They're a huge advertising agency, and there was another CEO, but the world's second largest advertising agency. And they were just telling us, they were like, "Oh yeah, we used, we had this pitch. It turned out they were competing against each other, and they didn't realize it. And one of them won, and one of them finished second. But they were talking about how they were utilizing AI, and for all these different iterations, and how they were using it to do all this market analysis, and how it spit it out, 8 years of data in 5 minutes, and they were just made it super concise. I remember the guy. There was a guy sitting next to me. He's a global CEO, and he just looks at me, and then I looked at him, and he was like, "They just told us they're not going to be in business in the next 3 or 4 years." And I was like, "Yeah." It's like, I don't think they realize that, but that's exactly what they just said. Like, I mean, these are firms that leverage hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. So, I mean, maybe these folks will figure it out. But I remember thinking about, after that comment, I was just thinking like Gensler and Perkins Will and these huge firms that just really just like, they just throw a bunch of stuff at the wall and see what sticks. Like, I just don't see a place in the modern world with AI where that's going to still be a relevant business model.
So what's interesting is that Evan and I've had this conversation because now that I'm kind of, he's not working for his big firm, and I've helped friends and stuff kind of go out and look for jobs and all of this other stuff. It started to kind of like dawn on me. I was just like, what's missing in the jobosphere of architecture is basically kind of creating a consortium of like A-quality architects.
Totally.
That's a really bad way of explaining it, but just these amazing
But I know exactly
architects
what you mean. Yeah.
that are just remote, and they're just working wherever it is that they are, and that
Totally.
that you're getting like the best minds, best talent, best passion, and you're going after same projects that the Genslers and people like that are doing. The problem is that unfortunately the model right now, which is kind of interesting in the article, is like there's almost this need to like strip us all the way down to bare and put us back up in a different way. Is that everybody thinks that, oh well, I have to have the Gensler, I have to have the big Starchitect and stuff. And the problem is that a lot of times you're not getting like Gensler's A team. You're getting you're getting a breath and a pulse.
Yeah.
Like that's what you're getting.
You're getting the Q team. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, or you maybe hiring.
Exactly.
If you're hiring XYZ other firm, you're getting all the principles and stuff. I mean, they just don't understand that, and that's on us to be able to explain that to you guys. I mean,
and when you have like these like micro studios, I remember. So I'm going to give you a little like history on like me, and so I see this little project that I have hovering over my head next to the light that Evan was asking me about. That it was me and my college roommate. We didn't have our licenses yet. We were helping a friend write a request for proposals for a project that they were looking for, and we helped them craft this document to issue out to some really big name architects. And these were architects that still to this day, I kind of revere the work that they do and the quality and just like the passion that they have for it.
Sure.
But so we just gave it to them. They started getting the proposals coming in, and they called us up and they're like, well, hey, this project pretty well because you helped craft this document. Why aren't you guys submitting? And we're like, well, we don't have a license and we don't.
Details,
no. Well, so come to find out, they basically kind of like asked us, hey, can, just we want you to come and present. And me completely out of my comfort zone, completely not knowing what the hell I was doing, gave a presentation that apparently, I honestly wish I recorded it because I have no recollection of it at all. But
legendary.
But apparently it was so impassioned that these firms that, again, are some of my favorite firms in the country, we beat and got this project. And
that's amazing.
Then won big awards for it and all of these other things. Yeah. And I had absolutely no clue of what the hell I was doing.
That's the best way to be sometimes, man.
I came into it every single time.
He talked about that, just being naive, right? Like that naive is sometimes
exactly. That was it. And that's what I'm saying. It's like, and so like these, in these like micro studios they're like, okay, I know I'm competing against like the Genslers and whoever else.
Yeah.
But, and so, you may come into it with like this lack of confidence that, I'm just tiny, but you come into it with a completely different mindset. It's like, all right, fine. It is a David and Goliath thing. Let's go after it. Yeah. And you go with that naive kind of like, devil may care kind of attitude.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I do business consulting for different firms globally, and I find it really interesting when firms are like, "Oh, well, they're not going to give it to us because we're too small." And I'm like, "No, maybe they will give it to you because you're the ones that are going to be involved."
They give it up before they even try, right? Like this happens all the time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, no, I used to use the quote that, my wife would have never married me if I hadn't asked her out, but then we got divorced, so I don't know that really works anymore. But the point remains the same. You know what I mean? Yeah, my ex-wife and I are very good friends. She would think that was funny. But the whole point, I guess the whole thing is, though, is the reality is this, if you kind of go in with a defeatist attitude, you've already lost. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for people to leverage their strengths and what they're good at moving forward using technology. Am I an AI evangelist? No. Do I know the most about it? Absolutely not. Do I sit in the room with the people that do? Yes. Like, do I hear what they're doing? 100%. So it's like, it's the reality that's coming. It's kind of like, okay, people, it's kind of like, I think about, you used the example of Henry Ford earlier, people are like, what is this assembly line nonsense? Where we craft, these beautifully crafted cars or whatever. Yeah. How many of those people are still in business? Or you look at the stock, the top 50 stocks from like 1940. How many of those companies are still in business? Right. It's like the reality is we have to always be iterating, and you would think that architects would be
not
better at that. You think our industry,
not on ourselves.
Yeah, no, 100%, no. Bankers and lawyers are way better at iterating than we are because there's more money in iteration. Where we are just afraid of liability. That's like we run like crazy from liability, and we're always worried about changing anything. I mean, I think the AI has a lot to do with that.
Well, I mean, just think about sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I mean, it's just like, think about like Blockbuster was the leader in home entertainment, and they saw it coming and said,
or Kodak with the digital camera, right? There's a lot of examples.
It's like, where the hell are they? Yeah, exactly. Where the hell are they now? Kind of thing.
So one of the things you say, William, in your article is, burn it all down, start over, right? And I think that is it's really hard to change institutions, big institutions. And I think we can definitely consider our profession an institution.
And totally.
And there's this,
because we have institutional problems.
We do. And there's, it's very, very, very difficult to change it from the inside. A lot of people go outside and try to change it from the outside and have just as big of a problem.
Yeah.
Right. Speaking from experience.
Yeah.
And then there's this idea that like empires have to crumble. I mean, I don't know if this is an empire, but you got to start over.
We're watching it right now in real time, bro. We're talking about different things, but we're watching it right now.
But so I'm curious.
I wrote an article.
I'm curious. And I would love to talk about that. I'm curious. What do you? Okay, so let's say that there's definitely going to be architects who are interested in pursuing what you're talking about. There's a lot who are not, who are just going to write it out, write it into the grave. But I'm curious, like what are your recommendations to prepare for and shape a new future of the profession? What do you think?
I mean, in terms of architecture school, and what I tell students all the time is just, try and hone your creativity skills. Don't necessarily worry so much about specific programs and stuff. If people are hiring you because you're a great renderer or you're great at Revit, that should actually be a red flag anyway. You know what I mean? So, like I can, well, not me because I'm not an architect, but people that I work with can teach people how to be great at Revit or whatever, different programs. But you can't teach people how to think critically. You can't teach people how to be fun to work with. You can't teach them how to have a great creative eye, and you can't teach them to have a good sense of humor, et cetera. So I mean, from my standpoint, it's like, how can you come out of school as the most well-rounded, kind of curious person possible? Because I think that is the real key to moving 100%. Forward in the profession. And, the thing is like, to your point, Evan, there are going to definitely be people that aren't going to change. And do I think that firms are going to start to change this way? No. But what I do think is there are going to be small firms that are going to start to form from other people that start to see opportunities like this. And then they will start taking the projects from the other people. And then that will shift everything. I'll give you an example. So like we used an example, my friends in Valentino and Valletta Malta. But I'll give you an example of myself. So in 2020, I started, and I don't even know if you guys know this. So in 2020, I started a public art practice with two buddies called a Gang of Three. And we were just trying to kind of find something to do and do right by kind of our city. And we had this opportunity that came out as for a $50,000 total project cost. It was actually 35, but they raised the budget let's get crazy. It was $50,000. It was a creative education display to talk about flooding. And basically what we ended up doing was, and kind of through a random string of events, we ended up creating this 2-acre interactive project that's since won 13 national and global design awards, including one from Fast Company for honorable mention for best urban design. We won Architects Newspaper for Editor's Pick Best Landscape Project in America. There's like Google Award. We were up for global finalists for Landscape Project of the Year, World Architecture Festival. It's hilarious. Okay, like we didn't really know what we were doing. We were just trying to make a difference in our community and leveraging growing up in East North Carolina, there's not a lot of money, certainly not a lot of money for art. How can we do more with less? And we just use design thinking, kind of critical thinking skills, and kind of using things like nature, sightlines, prevailing winds, and stuff like that as our collaborators, right? And to be able to create a meaningful experience. Now, what's since happened is so one of our partners was a landscape architect who's now just blown up. He had just started another firm, and he's a firm called Ground Control, Will Belcher. He's amazing. He's blown up, and now he's become the favorite to a lot of these architects and people like that. So he doesn't really have much time to be involved in our practice anymore. So he had stepped away. But now Lincoln and I, my other partner, we're doing projects all over the world. And we're doing we have a Black History memorial we're called a Gang of Three. We always partner with a third person anyway. Our first project would happen to be with Will. He's left, but in the next project we partnered with a friend of mine from architecture school who's third generation Richmond native whose family was enslaved near there, I believe. And we went to architecture school twice, and so we partnered with him on this project because we were doing got hired to do the public art within a building. But what we ended up doing was convincing the client and the building architect to let us turn the building into a giant piece of public art that firefighters inhabit, right? And it's getting ready to open in a couple of weeks, but it's on the site of a former Confederate Army camp, right on the terminus of an extraordinarily politically and historically charged site through less than 3 miles from the Confederate White House. I guess my point is if we had been traditionally practicing architecture, we would never be able to do the projects that we've been doing. And then all of a sudden now you use those as a couple of different examples. We've been able to do some pretty incredible things with just 2 or 3 people and thinking creatively. And that's not even thinking about AI. Just imagine what you could do if you start having all the production. I guess my point is once you kind of step and remove yourself outside of the kind of the normalcy that is architecture, I think you start to kind of see some of the cracks and the flaws and how you might be able to fix some of those things. So as I mentioned before, I was a previously managing principal for a firm called Hanbury. They had previously had an office in Raleigh, North Carolina. They were there for 5 years. They were about to close. They were about to close the office. A friend of mine became the CEO and asked me to basically restart the office. And at the time I was thinking about starting my own practice or moving overseas. And David had this really good pitch. He was like, you know what you should do is you should start your own practice and you should call it Hanbury and I'll pay for everything.
That's a nice way to put it.
It's an interesting thought. And I was like, well, here's the deal, man. I'm never working for anybody again in my life. I'll work with people and have people work with me, not for me. And there's a couple of different conditions. 1, 2, I'm going to hire whoever I want. No questions asked, literally no questions asked. And we are going to lose money in spectacular fashion for the next 24 to 36 months. But then after that, dump trucks full of money are going to start showing up. And that's exactly what happened. So we grew the practice from myself and one other person to being over 45 people by the time I left, and from no work to over $2.5 billion worth of work in less than 4 years. 49 months, I should say. And then so what happened was I was I've spent my entire career kind of creating situations to connect the dots for people to be successful, whether it's recruiting people, whether it's winning work, whether it's designing work, whatever it is. And what I decided to do was, instead of going from firm to firm or just being super bored, I mean, I could have stayed there. I worked with all my friends. I heard 40 of my friends, including the woman that I've known since she was 14, some of my best friends, et cetera. I could have stayed there and been happy forever, but I decided, my impact on this firm has been vertical the last 4 years. I could be here for the next 50 and have a tenth of the impact. So instead of quitting my job every 4 years, I decided to start my own practice and transition my clients every 3 to 4 years. Right. And so because I have this kind of global network through a variety of different reasons, I've been able to work around the world with folks from New Zealand, from Mexico City, from Malta to Philadelphia, kind of with this unorthodox business model. We're trying to kind of reimagine what architecture looks like and how it can get done. Because so basically the best way I can describe my practice is I'm essentially an on-contract part-time senior partner to different firms around the world. And so it's like, there are people that do PR or marketing or business development or programming consulting or operations or things like that. But typically none of those people have started firms from scratch, hired 40 people, made sure Christmas came that year for those people's kids, won projects with pain in the ass clients and huge complex project teams and designed them from beginning to end and delivered them where everybody's happy. I've done all those things, right? So when I speak with my clients, I don't get paid for my time at all. I don't charge by the hour, which freaks a lot of people out. I just get paid for my expertise. I get paid on the first day, and then we work on 12-month contract. And it's interesting because like when I talk to people about that, it's kind of trying to set a situation where there's no winners and losers, but everybody wins. And I think that's the situation with the AI too. It's like depends on how you frame it. How do you do more with less? I think back on the climate change memorial project I was talking about. How do you do more with less? How do you think strategically and be able to leverage design principles and business kind of ideas in new and more efficient ways rather than just throwing a bunch of time and effort at something or doing things like billing by the hour that doesn't necessarily work. It's not necessarily efficient. Like I'll give you an example. If I could work 40 hours a week for an entire year, let's be honest, in architecture, 60, 80 hours a week for an entire year and make a firm $1 million. Okay. And I get paid a salary. Okay. Well, cool. If I can pick up the phone in 5 minutes, making that same amount of money, I get paid the same.
Instead of working.
Like that's just the reality. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it's like, to me, it's like, how do you talk about value and not cost? And it's like, so it's interesting is whenever I talk to my clients or potential clients, they either think this guy's crazy. This guy's crazy. He's trying to rip me off. He's a lunatic. Like he's like, he's lying to me, or God, this dude's a genius. And it's and a friend of mine told me the other day, he's like, you're a crazy genius.
Self-selecting your partners.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. And that's the thing. And that's what I used to always tell my staff too, and the people, like my colleagues that I worked with at Amber, it's like, we don't want every project. We just want the right ones. You don't want every client, man. You just want the right ones. And that's the trick. It's like, I don't want to hire 50 people. I always wanted to hire like 10, 15 people that were just really, really good. And then pay them really well and take care of them, because I don't need to hire so many more people because these people are super badass, and like give them a lot of opportunities to be successful. And that's how good business gets done.
Well, that sort of goes back to the start of this conversation, and even in the article where you talk about like the inherently broken way that America kind of approaches these projects is more of like it's a commodity, not it's not architecture anymore. It's
it's building.
It's the assembly line, right?
It's building. It's not architecture. And I made that comment, and at the end the article, the CEO of my old company, he was like, "What do you want to do?" And I was like, "I don't want to be an architect, man." He was like, "Well, what do you want to do?" I was like, "I want to do really incredible architecture." There's a big difference.
Yeah.
And he was like, "That's a great point." I was like, "Yeah, that's a great quote." I was like, "Yeah, but it's also a really good point, man. It's true." I was like, "What are we doing?"
Yeah, I mean,
and it's not that they were doing bad architecture. It's just the industry in general.
Yeah, I think about the things you're talking about and like how incompatible it is with the current mindset that's out there. And that's why I keep going back to this idea of like, of course, like not everybody has to do it. And you do have to think and approach differently all of this stuff. It's really interesting to kind of think through that and think who wants to be a part of that, and because it is so hard to get out of the rut of principals out there are going after work just like they did last week, just like they did a year ago, just like they did 5 years ago, 10 years ago, right? It's like rinse and repeat, do the same thing. It is an assembly line. And like, the largest firms have to do the same thing because they've built this machine to operate that way.
You got to keep it. You got to keep people.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. No, but I mean, to Cormac's, or I can't remember if it was you, Cormac, or Evan. We were talking about the comment about my clients, when my business consulting clients is, it's self-selecting, right? I think the architecture industry is going to do the same thing. It's like, people are going to go and start doing their own things, whether it's folks like me that are trying to I've got like 10 different toes and 10 different disciplines with a gang of three. We're sort of architecture, sort of public art, installation, landscape, urban design, storytelling, everything in between, basically. And it's like, when I started my strategy practice, I intentionally started it because there was no one in the world doing what I'm doing. And there's still not. I'm the only one, which is really great in some ways because you don't have any competitors. And it's really terrible in others because people, even my best clients, still don't necessarily understand what I do, except I'm making millions of dollars. So it works out. But with a gang of three, when we started that practice, we were just trying to do right by our community and then really focus on social and sustainability issues. Like all our projects deal with socially conscious issues. That's all we do. We don't do pretty things. But when we started, we don't just do things because they're pretty. I should mention, we do pretty things. So we do beautiful things, but they always have a meaning behind them. But, when we started that practice, we didn't mean to start a practice that was completely unique globally. There's no one in the world that's doing what we're doing, but that was by accident. But what I think you're going to see is you're going to start to see a bunch of different firms and startups that maybe somebody's doing it on the side, and then they're going to start landing a big project, and then they're going to step out of a major firm and then just go and start doing their own thing moving forward. I think it will be interesting to kind of look back in 10 years and see kind of whether I'm right or wrong, or Jesus, whether the world still exists. At this point, but it is interesting. It's a hard thing with predictions, right? You're either a genius or you're a total lunatic. What was that guy thinking? But just again, I'm not an AI evangelist. I just see the writing on the wall from the conversations I've been intimately a part of. So.
And your article is really, really. I mean, you talk about AI being I guess maybe like the lever, right? In this potential shift here, and so. I just think it's at a different level than what people are reading in the headlines every day and dealing. You're talking about when you're sitting in that room with the other top CEOs and they're talking about the AI that they're using is a very different than the consumer grade stuff that everybody's got to. Yeah.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Right.
No. Yeah. Well, there's that, and it's also continuously developing. I mean, it's. The stuff that's here today is going to be like garbage by the stuff that 6 months.
Yeah,
from now.
and I mean to that point,
it's like punch cards by comparison to that stuff.
So that you know how to use it then, right? To even for more leverage. I don't think you can continue to ignore it and think that you're going to be doing things the way that you're doing them in the future. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, no, it is interesting. And one thing I will say that the younger generation, other than the fact that they don't know any better, right? And Cormac, you just gave us a really amazing example of why that is super valuable. They're also incredibly technologically literate. It's like my business partner is like a tech genius, and he gets so I'm like the complete opposite. Again, that's why I went into architecture, right? I'm terrible at all these things. And so he's like, I thought you said you saved it in the OneDrive, and I was like, I did. I don't know where it is. It's like whereas like I have like my young staff would just laugh at me like constantly. They were like,
you're
Brett,
like,
and they were like, yeah, totally, yeah, no, yeah. I mean, not intentionally, but yeah, I've become so. Yeah, I got old, and
it happens.
Yeah, I'm not as up on the technology as I should be. But hey, no, it is really interesting to see. I think it's actually could potentially be a golden age for architecture, but maybe that's naive. But I do think
we always have an existential threat, though, right? We always have an existential threat in this profession, and to me, like this seems like a pretty incredibly viable catalyst for change.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you look at it as just like CAD came in and, oh my God, it's going to destroy architecture. Revit came in, oh my God, it's going to destroy architecture. And AI is coming, oh my God, it's going to destroy architecture. No, what's going to destroy architecture are architects.
Yeah. And bad clients.
In I know we talk about this all the time. It's, and you even said it in the article about it's those that, are going to embrace it early on and adopt it. That's really going to kind of ride this wave for change. Versus, those who are just going to kind of like stand by. And, I'm hoping that I'm like in that little middle ground of like, yeah, I'll accept it, but I'm still going to draw with my pen and paper.
Yeah. Yeah, you're like the older architects that I know that I love very much that are like, oh man, I'm just going to keep using CAD. I'm going to ride this to the sunset, just to the very riding that razor's edge till the very end.
Well, the funny thing is that I'm willing to accept and change and adopt. It's just there are certain like habits that I've gotten that my just stream of consciousness, my thinking is better as it's kind of like this direct translation from head to hand.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I think that's the nature of the profession. Just you do what works best for you, man. Like, I mean, like I never understood this whole like when you're in studio, like you have to have 3 sections, 2 drawings. I'm like, man, that's not the reality. Like, do what explains your project, and then show me that.
Yeah.
Don't just kill time doing all this stuff that doesn't tell us anything. Like, because that's not real life. That's totally not real life.
As like the thing, because so what's interesting about the school I'm teaching at, it's predominantly taught by adjuncts. So it's all practitioners. And each of them have a very interesting take on how they go about teaching students and stuff. And mine's more along the lines of like, what I see as the reality of the profession and how you fit in there and how you can make a difference or how like, people who might be one way can fit in and others. But I always was telling them, and I was just telling this to a group that, reached out to me for their particular project and just said, hey, can you kind of guide me? Like, remember, you control the narrative. This is your story to tell. I understand that this is what they're looking for, but if that's not what tells your story, you've got to find the best way that you can convey your ideas and tell that story. And if and that's what we are, right? I mean, even through the drawings, even through our presentations, everything, if we're not storyteller first, it's going to be a horrible damn project.
Yeah, you can have the greatest idea in the world, but man, if you can't convince somebody to build it, it's just
exactly
my page.
I always go back to this story, and I'm like, it's like, can you imagine being in the room when Eros Saarinen was pitching the Gateway Arch? People must have looked at him like he was just out of his goddamn mind. Like, you want to do what? You want to like this big stainless steel arch? Nobody's ever seen it before. Nobody's ever done it before. And you want to do what? Yeah. And he must have been so impassioned and so like convincing. And they're like, yeah, why not? Let's do it.
Can't not do it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just
exactly.
Like, I mean, there are obviously some other examples, but I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
Like that never existed. Like,
even
the
totally.
thought is like, and it's just like, I would have loved, I mean, I think of one thing in this world that if they were like, if you could have been in any conversation, what conversation would it be? That one. I
don't know, man. That sounds like I would have wanted to be in your presentation.
Well, then somebody should have taken notes because I sure the hell wish I knew what I said.
Yeah. Well, actually, it's funny. You just reminded me of something pretty interesting in your Corb episode. You were talking about whether or not, Pierre Jeanneret or whatever, his cousin or whatever was, getting credit. Corb was notorious for that. So I don't know if you all know the story. So I'm from Raleigh, North Carolina. That's where I grew up. Yeah. So I was really fortunate that when I was in the eighth, ninth grade, I became really good friends with who's now a woman, a girl at the time. My friend Laura Harmon, whose father is Frank Harmon, who's like a really super notable architect. So I knew what I was getting into. Like I used to go over to his house all the time. But like it was interesting where I live in North Carolina, we used to be this kind of hotbed for modern architecture.
Yeah.
And the NC State's first architectural department head was this Polish guy named Matthew Nowicki. And so Matthew Nowitzki is internationally known specifically because he won the world's largest architecture competition to design Punjab, India, which you would know as Chandigarh.
Yeah.
So, and he was going back and forth and flying back and forth to India and leading all the design. And then his plane crashed in Egypt and he died. And then that's how Corb ended up getting the project. Well, it's funny because if you look at the Secretariat building and you look at Nowitzki's building, and you look at Corb's building, goddamn, they're the same building. Yeah. You know, but there's a bigger part to that. There's Sarin and Matthew Nowitzki were best friends. And there's a building in North Carolina called the Dorton Arena, Dorton, and it's a hyperbolic paraboloid, and it's basically two arches that are essentially falling down on one another, and it stretches high tensile cables between them. And it was the world's first building to hold its roof up entirely by cables. And I remember taking Michael Rotundi there when I was in grad school, and he was like, "Oh my God!" He was like, "Man, Tom Main and I, we were starting Morphosis. We would have never done some crazy shit like this. And these guys did this with slide rules in the 40s.
Yeah.
What?"
Yeah, totally.
But like, I have never measured the exact dimensions, but I know Saarinen apparently was super obviously upset when his friend died. And I'd be willing to bet that if you look at a plan view of, because there's two arches, that if you just basically stand one up, it's a very emblematic of the St. Louis Arch. So but it's worth checking out the story. It's an unfortunate situation with Nowitzki because his family gave all his work to North Carolina State Archives, but they didn't release a copyright. So because of that, none of his work could ever be reproduced for like 100 years. So the world totally forgot about him. They thought they were giving the work to the archives to preserve it, but everybody forgot about it.
It's like the warehouse at the end of the Indiana Jones movie, right? It's like,
oh yeah, no,
except it's architecture.
100%, yeah. And remind me before we go that I've got the most epic Frank Lloyd Wright story ever.
Let's
first-hand account. Okay, well so there's an architect in Malta, Richard England. He's amazing. And there's a new little mini documentary. It's only like 6 minutes. There's a European firm called Everhouse Art House Studio that did a little documentary on my friend Richard England. But he's basically like the godfather of Mediterranean architecture, right? Like he's become really good friends with Renzo Piano and Daniel Libeskind because they're super fans of his. You know what I mean? Like it's like he kind of reminds me of my friend. He's the Mediterranean version of my friend Frank Arman. I'll go to dinner with Frank and like Tom Kundig and Marlon Blackwell and Rick Joy and all those guys will be there, and then like Frank's like their leader, right? You know, like that's kind of like he's like the leader of their like gang, right? And then that's the situation with Richard in Malta. But he used to work for Gio Ponti. Ponti used to collaborate a lot with Scarpa and he has all these really cool stories. Apparently Scarpa wrote Mirror Image like Leonardo, and he was always so distracted and kind of scatterbrained that he would forget that he was smoking, and the cigarettes would burn out on his hands, so he was always covered in like scabs and stuff. He would leave them drawings, like trace paper drawings, and they couldn't read it, so they have to hold it up in front of a mirror to read what she said because it went in the opposite direction. So all these wild stories. But my friend Richard is in his late 80s. And he was telling me they were working on the University of Baghdad. And because at the time, I didn't know this until he was telling me this, that was like a really big deal architectural project, kind of like almost like Chandigarh. Like they were trying to collect the world's greatest architects. And like Corb had a project, and Frank Lloyd Wright with Gropius, or like Gio Ponti, all these people had different projects. And apparently everybody got along really well, except for everybody universally hated Frank Lloyd Wright because he was such an asshole. So they kind of all had like this understanding that nobody would ever allow Frank to be there when they were there because his ego was just too much to deal with. So my friend was there, and he was at the lecture of Walter Gropius. So Frank Lloyd Wright shows up a day early and doesn't tell anybody. And he hears that Gropius is giving a lecture. And Gropius is like, the genius is in the collective, we all collaborate, et cetera, which is the opposite of Frank Lloyd Wright. Complete opposite. I'm the genius, you were my draftsman, I'm the collective genius, whatever. So he shows up to Gropius's lecture, he walks in like halfway through and goes and kind of interrupts everything and sits in the front row, and Gropius is kind of like looking at him like, what are you doing here? Like, this is super awkward. So my friend is in the audience. And he's sitting there talking, and at the very end, he asks if there's any questions. And Wright raises his hand, and he says, "Let me ask you something, Walter. When you make babies with your wife, do you call your neighbors to help?" What an asshole. What an extraordinary asshole. The,
Jeez.
and I remember when he told me that, I was like, of course he said
Yeah.
that.
Wow. Man.
So, yeah. Anyway, yeah, when you guys were talking about these things on your episodes, I was like writing down notes. I was like, I need to remember to tell him this and this. No.
I will say, it's interesting that I've sort of seen as a thread with all of them, Korb, Gropius, Royer, whoever, every one of them, Frank. I mean, what was interesting about their common thread is all of them, yes, they had their egos. Yes, they were probably all assholes, but they had that naive, like, I can do whatever kind of mentality in a time when what they were doing didn't exist. So they were they were dumb enough to do something so game changing that it essentially changed the world of architecture. And they may have said, "Oh yeah, I know exactly what I'm doing," but I'm looking at it more on a critical level. Is like, no, you didn't. You didn't know what the hell you were doing. You're like,
but that's okay.
And that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
He's like, if they were honest with themselves, they would probably sit in the dark room and say, "Yeah, I don't know what the hell I'm doing." But you know what? They had the confidence to go out there and say, "This is what I'm doing."
It's guts, man. It's like risk tolerance, and it's like pushing. I mean, you get into these. I think we've probably all experienced this. It's like, who can have the best idea and who can actually get it to become a reality? Like those, and then it becomes like this competition for the best ideas, and it's way beyond one project. It's like it just keeps going, and it's kind of an interesting life to live for sure.
Well, I mean, Falling Water, if the stories that I was told is to be believed, came about because he was left out of I'm blanking, Congress of blah, 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 you know what I'm talking about. I can't remember.
Korb's group. Yeah,
Korb's group. Yeah. And they were basically like, "You're washed up, you're nothing, you can't do this." And he was just like, "Watch me." And but if that's true, then great. If it's not, it was still one of these things. It's just like the competition that they had bred that. And what's interesting is I think these mega firms, kind of like to bring it back, like these mega firms and everything sort of take that like whole desire of competition out of it. It's just like, again, it's an assembly line kind of mentality. I mean, they may be some really competent, well-designed buildings, but it's still an assembly line mentality.
Yeah, is that architecture, or is that more facilitating a building? So I think that's the question.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and it's what exactly defines architecture is the real question, right? It's kind of like pornography, you know it when you see it,
Yeah.
But it's like, it is totally, it is. Yeah, it's interesting. I will say that apparently Renzo Piano is like the nicest dude on the face of the earth, by the way. I think he apparently spends like his spare time like helping old ladies across the street and stuff. So there are some really good ones out there.
We're working on our second project.
That's right. I did hear that.
And that's, I mean, the only thing is like they wish that we would stop designing through construction, but other than that, they're like, "Dude's amazing." I mean, one of our principals is just, he fawns all over him, for good reason too, because, he's not only good, but he's, a good person too.
Yeah, he's a wonderful guy.
Back to this.
Yeah, his very
William's
best friend
comment about being likable, being somebody that people like to work with, right? And that's the truth. Deal. So, I think we should call it. I think we would love to have you back and talk about your next article that just got published, William. About the federal. What's the actual terminology?
Basically, it's a federal Make America Federal Buildings Beautiful Again, or some dumb shit like that. Yeah, no, but I should mention that the Piano's very best friend is the one who told me that story about, right?
Yeah.
So it's it's funny. Yeah, and But anyway, there I had another story about Buckminster Fuller in
Next
Raleigh
time.
too, but we'll
Next
leave
time.
it.
Let's do it
Next
again.
time.
Yeah, please,
He-
definitely.
Great.
Well, before I forget, Bucky did not actually invent the space frame. Somebody else did.
Ooh,
And he
this
actually
is like
never
a
claimed
cliffhanger
it.
right here. Like you're just the right amount of
He
clickbait with
he
this.
didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did not try to convince people that he designed it, but his business partner did. Another guy
Yeah,
in Raleigh
yeah.
that I'll tell you about
Nice,
next time.
nice. All right,
Yeah.
cliffhanger.
So, no, but thank you, thanks guys. No, I really appreciate it.